Welcome to my presentation about psychology. I hope you will agree with me by the time you've seen this and thought about this subject a little bit more, about how interesting this really is as an opportunity to understand more about the people that are around you and who you are as well, where you've come from and where you might be going as a person. What we have is a subject that is a science subject. So that means we follow the procedure of experiments, we write hypotheses as well. But it isn't just, it isn't always appropriate to understand people by using experiments. So we're also interested in methods such as interviews to understand people's emotional states and their, what it's like to be in their shoes. Here's a quote from a typical student, perhaps. Hopefully, everybody that comes through our doors enjoys the subject, can relate to it, finds it exciting and stimulating. Okay, I think that's one of the key things about it. But of course, there's a lot to learn, so you can't just rely on the fact you find it interesting. I'm hoping that you will explore the resources that we give you that are available to you through our learning platforms and more widely out there in books and on the internet. What will you study? Well, in our subject, you'll study these range of topics here, okay? And it's a good way of appreciating the nature of the subject by looking at the topics. You can see there's biological dimensions, there's social dimensions. So in science, you might have come across neurotransmitters, the chemical messengers of the brain, which have an impact on a lot of the processes that go on inside our bodies and how we think, and are maybe at the root of mental illnesses as well, and depression, schizophrenia. So we'll explore those in various ways, but there's a core topic there. You can also see things like memory, how your memory works. That's a cognitive approach to psychology, thought processes as well. Attachment, how the importance of forming core attachments to our parents and other members of our family, and what happens if that doesn't work out. Also, there on that screen, you can see the mention of research methods. So we're really interested in how we investigate people, in how we do experiments, how we do interviews, questionnaires, how to design them. And there are lots of questions to answer. There's a maths component to that as well. If you've got some results, you need to analyse them to see if the scores between two conditions in an experiment, see if that difference is big enough. So that's a core part of what we do, and that's why we have a mathematical sort of requirement from our qualifications. In year 2, we go on to explore in depth some topics. I mentioned schizophrenia already. Relationships is one topic that students find really interesting. We're looking at what attracts people to each other in the first place, and the phases that relationships go through, from formation to perhaps sometimes breakdown. We look at modern aspects of relationships, like the relationships people feel like they have with famous people. And you can see also their forensic psychology, how we can bring our psychological understanding to the things that criminals do, to the way that we can help the police solve crimes, the methods such as profiling, which have been used to catch killers sometimes. Or what can we learn about psychology that helps us understand criminal behaviour? So that's one of the topics that you'll do in year 2. So there's our entry requirements, confirming really what I've said. Obviously, there's essays to write, so you would want to be having sort of reasonable English skills as well in this subject. But in terms of what we asked for, we mentioned the science, we've mentioned the maths requirement as well that we like our students to have, because there's always an aspect, it's like some of the aspects that you've done at GCSE, like means, modes, medians, measures of central tendency, and other higher skills as well. So we'll be taking you through those, but I think it's fair to say that that will help you. That grade 5 will help you with that. Now, I just wanted to include an example really from our course. So this is a very famous case study about which helps us understand phobias. It comes from the 1920s originally. You can tell by the look of that photo. And what you have is a young baby who, in those days, it was kind of scientists generally were less considerate about their participants in their studies. And in this case, what Watson and his assistant did is they conditioned a fear that was not pre-existing in this young child who they named Little Albert, protecting his identity. You can see it's in inverted commas there. They changed his name. So they were considerate to some degree about aspects of their participant. They would have regarded him as a subject in those days because scientists had different approaches to the people that they were studying. Subject is having the experiment done to them. These days we would refer to the people who help us out in our studies as participants. So what Watson did was he conditioned a fear that didn't exist in Little Albert. He every time there was something furry, Watson made a loud banging sound in his laboratory room, and soon the kind of sight of all these furry things, including a white rat, which he was particularly fond of, would be upset Little Albert. So he had grown to form a connection, just like if there's the classic study of Pavlov's dogs, which you may or may not know about, but he learned to form a connection between something and something else. In this case, something furry and an unpleasant, scary, loud noise. Okay, and so there's a generalization process, and this is an interesting insight into how phobias work. You learn to connect the feeling of fear with something which, in its own right, might not be able to harm you really, but the theory is that it harks back to some aspect of your childhood, perhaps when you were scared of something. You might develop a fear of birds following an incident where a bird, got too close or got trapped in a house and flapped around and scared you. So now you generalise that to all birds wherever they are, and maybe and their feathers. That sometimes happens to people, and obviously psychology might be able to help them with their fear. So the principles of this study are kind of like explored in the idea of the learning approach to psychology, and also the study of mental illness, the study of explanations of phobias as well. So some of these key studies underlie what psychology is about. So yeah, look, there's some of the questions that we would talk about in lessons. There you can maybe you want to follow some of those up yourself. Watson himself became a famous theorist in the idea of advertising as it was in its infancy in America at the time. And I hope that when we've been looking at something from a lesson, students will be encouraged to go away, find out more about it, and not just be limited with what they learn in psychology, because there's so much available out there. You can sort of personalise your own kind of insights and your own learning. And there's information that I told you about. So just moving on to look at what makes a successful psychology student. Look at these skills. Hopefully you'll see this as yourself. we don't want you to just sit there and look at that study. We want you to, and in fact, the exam requires you to analyse it, to be critical of the study, to point out its strengths and weaknesses. You know, there was definitely consequences for Little Albert in that study, so we have ethical questions to ask. But also, it did help. It did provide an insight into the origin of phobias and all sorts of human behaviours as well. Then again, like, you know, of course, there's just one child there, but actually, you know, we're still talking about this study, you know, 100 years later virtually. So, you know, it's interesting how sometimes a case study can reach out, you know, can be so descriptive of human processes that, you know, it provides us with an insight into aspects of human behaviour at large. And you know, as the course goes on, here's the sort of things we would be learning. You know, verbal ideas, describing ideas, like writing quite small essays. You know, 20-minute essays, balancing arguments, making judgments, mathematical skills, theories, and concepts. You know, and all of those will sort of determine your success in this subject, and we work on those systematically across the 2 years that we study psychology. And there's our quote again. And just to confirm, really, that you know you could take the subject and just in year 12, and then you would have two papers. Virtually everyone that takes it, though, sees it through to the end of the second year, when you have 3 2-hour papers across a period of about, you know, perhaps one a week in the summer of year 13, and then, you know, you're answering some, like I mentioned, 20-minute essays and shorter questions, applied questions, what you would study. And so we mentioned forensic psychology. So here, you know, you can see the sort of things that psychologists might be involved in. But there are other areas here as well. And obviously, psychology is a very popular degree study, but it can have all these sort of insights. You have sports psychologists, you know, mental health professionals, you know, psychologists who support family processes as well. So, you know, lots and lots of occupational opportunities. Quite often now, if you want to be become a chartered psychologist, you would need to have like a master's degree after your first degree in psychology. You may need to have some professional experience as well. But on the other hand, a degree in psychology, you know, would show a potential employer that you've hopefully got a good insight into human processes, how humans work. So it's going to show you all of those things, even if you don't become a psychologist, like precisely at the end of the day. And you can see a little list of occupations there, which match up to the profession. I finally finished with just to emphasise sociology is one of our subjects as well. I'm also head of that subject, but look at the difference between the two. You know, more of a humanities subject, sociology, like larger essays without the scientific dimension. Neither have coursework, and sociology is dealing more with inequality. So it has, you know, current affairs will be part of that. It's useful in psychology to know what's going on and you see a story, but not as essential. So that's just a little additional thing that I wanted to include there for you. Okay, right. So thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me at the school, and I look forward to hopefully teaching you in the future. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.